In August 2012, workers at the South African platinum mine at Marikana began a series of wildcat strikes demanding better pay and conditions. 6 days into their action, riot police used live ammunition to break up the protests, killing 34 people and injuring 78 others. The conduct of the police, backed up by the ANC government, provoked outrage both in and outside South Africa. What happened at Marikana evoked painful and bitter memories of a time not so long ago when the police routinely used violence to break up anti-government demonstrations in black townships. Back then, the ANC was at the forefront of the struggle for black equality. Well, those events at Marikana are the subject of a powerful documentary, Miners Shot Down, made by the South African filmmaker Rehad Desai, who joins me in the studio. But before I chat to him, let's take a look at the film's trail.
The life of a black person in Africa is so cheap. Asifuni gazi ezophalala, kodwa sifuna izinkinga zenu nemifuzo yenu bayitholakale comrade.
Kazi funa umkhathaze kureko siphendula ngemali esifunayo. Kuphela. Sikwazi ukufika emsebenzini. Kodwa engekasiphendula imali esifunayo. Asizisuka apha. Singazisuswa ngabo lamaphoyisa lapha.
Why the use of police force armed to the teeth against miners who were not occupying mining property or territory?
I still remember vividly the face of those workers.
Rehad Desai, thank you for joining us. I have to say now that it's a very powerful trail, and there was footage that we deliberately excluded because some of it was very, very graphic and very bloody.
It's a very tough event in South Africa's history to be reminded that our state can still, do such horrendous things. I mean, our history's been littered with massacres, really. 1960 Sharpeville, 1976 Soweto. It really marks our history and marked forward movement, in a way, of our country.
Do you feel that what happened at Marikana is on par with Sharpeville and Soweto?
I think it's actually worse, because here we have a democratically elected government, our government, doing this against their own support base. These are the very people that catapulted them into power. Now, to turn on them in this brutal fashion and side openly with these huge, powerful corporations in the interests of profit is really a very sad and unfortunate day for the African National Congress.
Because the mine was owned by lawmen, and as we saw from that trail, the union leaders made it perfectly clear we just simply want to protest, to have our living conditions improved and our pay. We also saw from that trail that they were not armed with guns or knives. Some of them simply had sticks, clubs.
Well, exactly. The narrative is that these workers who are simply on strike asking for more money, unofficial strike or a wildcat strike, were somehow criminals because some, violent incidences had occurred, always after they'd been fired upon by the union, their own union, or the mine security, or the police. So there was always an argument for self-defense. That's not to condone the lives that were lost in the lead-up to the police opening fire in this fashion, but certainly there is no match between these, fighting sticks and pungas and, spears, which people carry in symbolic defiance in many ways against these machine guns, which fire 60 bullets a minute.
And when you're talking about the story, or telling the story of what happened at this mines, it's not just the human tragedy that people were killed, but it's also the collusion that went on at the very top of government, in the very heart of government, as you rightly pointed out earlier, involving a union, the National Union of Mine Workers.
Well, this is a terrible thing. I mean, they had such a courageous history. They pioneered the formation of legal trade unions in South Africa, some huge campaigns and strikes to get them recognised and to try and push up the wages. And now the person who led that is our Deputy President of South Africa, is also the guy who sits at the centre of this. So in many ways, what we've seen is something that should never happen in a democracy, where the government is doing the bidding for a large corporation. Now, it's to what degree they were planning on actually killing people, we don't know at this moment. But there certainly is conclusive evidence that they planned together to break this strike, which they should have never done in the first place, and as we've seen, it's had deadly consequence.
Because there is an investigation into what happened, and it's due to conclude, I believe, this month, or certainly next month at the very latest. So whatever the findings are, there are certainly elements there, one would imagine, that will make for some very uncomfortable reading for the likes of Cyril Ramaphosa, because he was a former leader of the National Union of Mine Workers. He was also one of the directors of Lonmin, the mine owners.
Exactly. Now, how uncomfortable that reading from the Commission, its final report will be, is the question we're all waiting to have answered. This has been a 2-year-long Commission of Inquiry, and there's been heaps of very damning evidence against the likes of Lonmin, Cyril Ramaphosa, the police, and the last police witness was actually shocking in how candid he was in saying, essentially, he cannot believe that this massacre happened without sanction from the very top, without political agreement from the executive. Now, for a policeman to turn around and say that, and say his fellow commanders, operational commanders, also believe so, but the police commissioner has been very evasive on this question of whether they were sanctioned to use live ammunition, is the big question. Now, if it is proved to be so, now, in the coming years, this will certainly be earth-shaking revelation for South Africa, and we'll see some of our top politicians in court, and I think a huge dent in the support for the African National Congress.
But it is a big narrative that your film is exploring, and the reality is that things have to go on the cutting room floor, not just the pictures, but also some of that actual story. How do you actually determine what has to go and what has to stay without undermining the power of that narrative and perhaps weakening the experiences of the people who were in that film?
Well, you see, this massacre was not just an event, a local event in South Africa. This is of international importance. South Africa is one of the key democracies in Africa, and therefore a very important power. It's the most economically powerful country on the continent. So what happens in South Africa is important for many people. Also, millions of people around the world help to bring down that country through isolating it internationally. Therefore, the context of how this came about is very critical. Now, the problem is the more context you add to a narrative, often, you know, it weighs it down, slows it down. But finding out what the key critical context is and shaving, you know, that's the art of making a good documentary, I think. So you keep the narrative going, you keep the pace going, you keep your viewers inside the story, and that's what the film's managed to do, is to pull the audience into that story and shock them, really, once you start feeling and seeing these mine workers and seeing them as ordinary human beings. Which
makes it more like a film rather than a documentary in many ways.
Absolutely. It's been structured very much like a film. We've used filmic convention. The dramaturgy is all very important. That's also part of its success. it keeps you, it's very compelling. You're in with showing rather than telling.
And it deservedly has won awards. It is on release now, effectively. So in London, where can we see it?
Rich Mix tomorrow night is our sort of cinema premiere for the UK. We're hoping to get into Picture House and maybe a couple of the other independent chains. So let's see. If you are interested, please do come along. It's quite something.
Sure. Time is running very, very tight, but for those who, as you said earlier, fought hard to isolate South Africa externally, there was a very powerful anti-apartheid movement in London. Do you think that all of those who contributed to that struggle, that they feel betrayed, that Marikana was that turning point, that it led them to question, well, what was it all about if what we've actually managed to bring in is a little better than what was there before?
Well, I think many of them do. I'm not sure if most of them do. There's lots of confusion, and that's why we've made the film. But certainly after watching the film, I believe most people will feel that emotion, a complete betrayal.
OK, Rehad Desai, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for coming in and sharing your experiences with us on that film, Miners Shot Down. So it's on release now, and really go on the net and track it down at the nearest cinema, independent cinemas. Thank you.